Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Beyond Words Mastering Data Storytelling Workshop. I'm Randy Bennett, the Executive Director of External Relations at the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications. We are one of the sponsors, along with Flourish, of the session. The workshop today is intended to provide insights on using technology to tell data-driven stories. In the first hour of the workshop, we will share case studies on how professional and student investigative journalists identify, collect, mine, and present data to tell powerful stories. The second half of the workshop will be an interactive presentation focused on data visualization tools from Flourish and Canva, which have made it easier to create interactive charts, maps, and more without the need to code. They will be using real data sets, including one from a case study today. The University of Florida also sponsors the ONA's Data Investigative Journalism Award. Our panelists in this first hour include an award winner from last year, a nominee from this year, and one of our students. We'll take questions at the end of the first hour of the workshop. Our first presenter is Stephen Rich, database editor for the Investigations Unit at the Washington Post. The Post won the UF Data Investigative Journalism Award last year in the large newsroom category for an investigative series examining how much cities pay to resolve police misconduct allegations. At the Post, Stephen worked on investigations on virtually every beat, including stories on the National Security Agency, policing tax liens, civil forfeiture, and school shootings and college athletics. Please welcome Stephen Rich.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Rich. I'm the database editor for investigations at the Washington Post. I've been at the Post for a decade now, doing data work for investigations. This past year, we won the ONA Data Journalism Award, and I want to walk you through sort of what the story was and how we did it, how we approached these things. If you have any questions, please hold them for the end. I will make a personal request there too, is if you do have questions, please come up to the microphones here. I am hard of hearing. I can't hear you unless you do that. So the story that we worked on was, it came from this broad idea of, I want to know how often police departments settle alleged misconduct lawsuits and for how much money. And the story itself has been done before. People in various individual cities have collected this data for those cities and said, oh, they paid out this much in this many lawsuits. But the question that I wanted to know started with who was the most costly cop in an individual city. And I came to the realization pretty quickly that it's not a really good measure, because the most costly cop is the guy who did one awful thing and cost the city $20 million. But the reality is you have some police officers who have these settlements all the time, and those are the people we really wanted to get at. So we started this project because we had been doing this forever. We started with collecting a database of every fatal police shooting across the country, a project that is now in its 9th year. We moved on to cops who were fired and forced to be rehired through arbitration, and then we did a project on the geography of unsolved murders in major cities. And so we sort of this was a continuation of this long project. And we really kind of I looked to a story that I did in the first year of the police shootings project, which is we wanted to know how many officers in 2015 had previously shot and killed someone when they shot and killed someone in 2015. And we found 55 in just that year alone. And so we were like, repeaters is kind of our business. Keith Alexander, who's the lead byline on this story, was the reporter on the story that won last year. And he and I sort of get together every few years and do a story like this, which is just like how cops doing bad things over and over again. So the major findings in this was we found $3.2 billion of settlements across 25 large police departments over a decade. Half of the money, and the big finding was half of that money was spent on officers who had been involved in multiple claims during that time. We found 7,600 officers in those 25 departments who had been involved in multiple payouts, 1,200 of whom had been involved in at least 5 payouts over the course of 10 years. There was one police officer who, at the time that we reported this, had 143 settlements made on his behalf. He works for the Philadelphia Police Department. You won't run into him. He is on permanent desk duty as they resolve the final 50 cases that are still pending against him. So I want to go over how we did this and sort of give you an idea of what it takes to do something like this. So I filed 50 open records requests with the 50 largest police departments in the country, and then just kept following up. I set reminders for myself. I put things on my calendar to make sure that folks are hitting deadlines. We didn't get all of them. Some of them denied us. Some of them wanted way too much money. At the end, we were able to get 25, so we were able to get half of the data sets and standardize them. The hard part came is that most police departments don't actually track who is involved in the payouts that they do. They just know that there was a payout, and some of this is because they don't want to know. If you don't know that the officer has 5 payouts, you don't have to fire him. You don't have to punish him. And so I had to go through, by hand, 22,858 court cases to pull the information on there, most of which were on Pacer, so I couldn't scrape it. It was just a lot of elbow grease. And then I basically found the top officers and sent them to the reporter, who then did a bunch of reporting, and we reached out to every department to get comment from the officers who had the most in each city. I want to talk about the data issues. This is sort of one of the things that you will come up against no matter what kind of data set you're dealing with or story that you're dealing with. So obviously the biggest one I've already talked about, which is the cities didn't give us the names of officers, but the hardest thing I always have to deal with pretty much every project is I get data in all sorts of formats. So I got some in Excel files. Those were great. I love to get Excel files, CSVs. Those are great. I get most of them in PDFs. They're awful, but they're not as awful as they used to be because there's a lot of really good software to get data out of PDFs, unless they send you an image PDF, which is not, you can't just pull the data straight out of. And then my favorite was a department that printed out a 605 pages of a spreadsheet and mailed it to me. Getting that into a usable format was fun. So some of the data was missing fields. When you're trying to do this Frankenstein data monster, you kind of end up with that. There is, especially with police departments, there's almost no standardized data from department to department. Even the FBI, the data that the FBI collects is terrible, at least in part because a lot of cities don't put data into it. One of the things we ran into is some people sue and win money from police departments without ever knowing the name of the officer, and the police department never having to turn over the name of the officer. So our numbers are low. The 7,600 officers who are in there, there's almost certainly more who were just John Does in our data. We often needed secondary data, so when we got names, it was not names, it was badge numbers, and then we had to make requests for badge numbers to match up with those things, and then we had to figure out when they were working there, because multiple people can have the same badge number if they're working in different, if somebody worked a decade ago and is working now, you may have the same one, so you have to figure out who is who and make sure not to get over those things. But often, the cities and the police departments had conflicting data. We'd ask for both of them, from the finance department and from the police department. And they'd say, here are settlements for 10 years, and they'd have different numbers. And so having to reconcile that was tough. A lot of this is just you put your head down and you do the reporting. You figure out which one's right, which one's wrong, and get there. So I want to talk about generally why we use data, why I find it so good. I think the biggest reason is it adds context. I think I'm never going to be the person that sits here and oh yeah, I want a hard lead with numbers in it. That's just going to bore our readers. And I love a good story. I love a good anecdote. And what I like to do is to have an anecdote and then write one sentence after that anecdote, which is basically, and this is how often this is happening. Because when you can provide your readers with that context, they start to realize that you're not just writing about the one person who is in this really awful situation. You're writing about something that's systemic, and that gives us scale. And the more scale that you have, the more likely you are to get results from your reporting. I also love data because it helps find anecdotes. I like to, I'm able to use the data to say, this is the officer you want to go after, whereas we don't know that ahead of time. We never would have known about the officer in Philadelphia because he's never been written about. And so, the data really helped it. And I just think it makes the story better. It differentiates you. Not everybody is using data, so that's good. It helps focus the reporting on what's the trends and what are outliers. And I don't do the visualization stuff, but I find visualizations very helpful for most readers. I am more of I look at numbers and I can understand them, but I have been told repeatedly by my boss that that's not how other people look at things, and so we visualize them. And it often helps us to be the skeleton of the story. The thing that I want to stress here is that the most important part of data journalism is the journalism. If you just put a whole bunch of numbers on a page without any sort of context, without any understanding of why the numbers are the way they are, you end up giving readers an incomplete picture of what's going on. So you need to be doing the journalism around the data work. And I find that the data work itself is basically just journalism. I see data sets as sources, and my job is to ask those sources questions, and my job is to ask the questions that get the answers that we need, but also the answers that are accurate. And so in this case, the data gave us the roadmap for all of this, and it allowed us to ask pointed questions and to do something that no one else had done. And so it really gave us a lot of extra oomph in the story that we otherwise couldn't have done. My job at the Post has often been like being the data Frankenstein maker, is what one of my colleagues put it. Is like I like to go to a bunch of disparate agencies that are all collecting the same data and put it together to get a national look at things, because frankly, the federal government does a really poor job of keeping data on most things. Policing is a huge one. And so I find these projects to be really gratifying. I want to leave you with a few resources on the things that I use to do this. PACER, if you don't know, is the federal court's website. It currently costs money to do pretty much anything on there, including searching. But knock on wood, it will maybe be free at some point in the future. I don't know. I use state and local court sites. Most jurisdictions have their court cases online. You can search for things. One of the notable places that does not have it online, and if any of you are from there and do courts reporting, is Cook County. Chicago, Illinois does not have their court cases online, which makes everything harder when we're trying to report about that. I always go to open records portals. You never know what somebody has asked for before you, and you don't need to file a FOIA if somebody has done that and it's been published already. Open data portals are the same way. You can find really weird data sets on open data portals. Not all of them are helpful. I'm pretty sure the US's open data portal has almost no good information. It's all just no good information for journalism. It's like a ton of the stuff is from NOAA. In this case, we use news sites. We can just using Nexus and using Google, we can find stories on these things, and they were able to give us sort of a push in the right direction on a lot of these, and able to check who and what has done this. But I will leave it there and pass it on to Agnel. I think we're probably happy at the end of this to answer questions. We're trying to leave space, especially if you have questions about how to do some of this stuff, from a technical standpoint.
Thanks, Stephen. Our next presenter is Agnel Phillip, a data reporter for ProPublica, where he has covered child welfare, indigenous issues, flight safety, and criminal justice. He previously worked as a data reporter at the Arizona Republic. ProPublica is a finalist for the Data Journalism Award this year and was the winner in the small medium category last year for an investigation into hotspots of toxic air pollution that the EPA has allowed to take root across America. Please welcome Agnel.
Thank you. Thanks, Randy. So a decent chunk of my presentation is going to be, I'm going to talk about the story that's nominated, but I also kind of want to run through conceptually kind of how I think about approaching a data project, especially from an investigative perspective, because I think, in 15 minutes, there's only so many hard skills I can leave you with, so at least kind of giving you a roadmap of when I evaluate a project that is, pitched to me, or I'm thinking about a project, this is kind of how I think about the data within it. And as I said, you'll notice there's a lot of crossover with what Stephen just presented. I apologize for that, but it'll be good reiteration. So I think overall, what Stephen was saying at the end of his presentation is kind of the takeaway I want you to have from this. Data is just like any other source. Like when you are doing a data analysis, you are interviewing a data set, right? So it's important to be humble and realistic about what the potential is of doing a data analysis, because just like sources, data, I won't say it lies, but it misrepresents, it confuses, it doesn't necessarily show you exactly what the truth is on the ground. But it is important because you can show scope. You can, in some cases, uncover impropriety. Like you can't actually find a story in a data set. It's hard to do, as I'll get into, but you can do it, and it is an important and growing part of investigative journalism. So here's kind of some universal truths that I guess I live by when it comes to data and data analysis. First off, all data is bad, okay? A large part of the work of data journalism is figuring out how bad it is and whether its badness is relevant to your specific project, right? Because like I said, data is like any other source, and it's often or almost exclusively inputted at some point by a human. A human touches data in some form. Humans make mistakes, humans lie, humans screw up. This all translates into the data in some form or another. So you can't just take things that you do in an analysis at face value, especially if you're doing a very kind of specific analysis. The process of how you figure that out, it looks a lot like traditional journalism, like Stephen was talking about. The journalism part of this work is very important. You have to talk to people. You have to talk to the custodians of the data, if that's a government agency, if that's a nonprofit, whoever manages, inputs the data, really understand how a data set's created. But you also need to talk to experts in the field who've used that data or who study it so they can help you put it into context and help you identify where the shortcomings are. And all of this is to figure out whether the data you have and the analysis you have matches the on-the-ground reality. Because like I've kind of alluded to with data, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, oftentimes it's not actually a duck. So you do have to really do the work to figure that out. And if you're going to use data, especially in an in-depth project, you have to incorporate it early if you want the best return. So this is how I think about it. I don't know that this is you'd find this in a data journalism textbook or anything, but this is the two kind of types of how you approach a data project, and I call them big to small and small to big. So big to small is essentially starting with the data analysis. You have a data set, you've been given a data set, you do some sort of number crunching on it, and you're like, oh, here's the story, I'm going to do the story about X, Y, and Z. That's kind of how I think about a big to small sort of thing. Small to big, which is kind of more of the stuff that I end up doing in investigative work, is where you start with a tip or a story idea, like something a little bit more specific, because it allows you to go out and find the data, and then you try to show how often something happens. You try to assign scope to it. And obviously, there's a whole spectrum of scenarios in the middle. Projects will look like 25% of one of these approaches, 75% of the other, vice versa. But the ultimate goal is to have your analysis and reporting complement each other. So here is kind of a little bit more of a description of the big to small. So like I said, mining a data set for stories. I find this very hard to do in an investigative context because you don't know what you're looking for. And that's when you're doing an analysis, if you think about it in the reporter-source kind of relationship, like sometimes you don't know the question that you're actually trying to ask, right? So like oftentimes you'll get a data set and you'll just do these very high-level summary analyses, and it's not actually that meaningful. You know, whether because of weaknesses in the data set or like whatever your analysis is doing and whatever data point you get out of it, it's not actually that important. But if you are able to ground truth it, which in this case means you report out those examples, and there can be a use for that. Like the project that Randy mentioned that won the award last year from our publication about toxic air pollution, that was a novel analysis. I was taking a huge data set of air pollution throughout the country and saying, we're going to identify all the hot spots and we're going to do a story about that because that's inherently newsworthy, it's inherently investigative. Like, we're just going to go forward with that. I can talk more about some of the challenges that they ran into on that project. I didn't personally work on it, but because they started kind of from a big perspective, they did run into some challenges when they actually got to the ground to figure out what the reality was. But that is one way to do it. Another example from my publication that you may have seen is the secret IRS files. If somebody comes to you and gives you a database of confidential tax records, pretty much anything you do with that's probably going to be a story, right? So that's kind of the two examples that we've done that follow that. The more common one in our line of work is to start with the anecdote, start with the story idea, because you already know there's a problem to report on. There's already your journalist instinct has kicked in and you're like, I think this is something that needs to be reported on. And this can help you make your analyses much more sophisticated, much more specific and targeted, and it just makes it easier to kind of ground truth everything and make sure the reality matches up with what your analysis shows. Where you run into problems with this approach is when you try to add data in the middle or the end of a project, which often happens because people think, oh, we're just going to do all this reporting and then the data will come in and it'll help make the point or whatever. Don't do that. Even in this case, it's important to, if you want data to be a part of this project or it seems like scope is something you're going to want to show, bring the data folks in early. All right, now I'll actually talk about the stories that I was brought here to talk about. So the series that is up for, or a finalist for the award, kind of had a mix of both of these approaches, which is why I wanted to kind of get that framework for y'all to think about. There's the small to big and the big to small, and I thought they were both kind of successfully executed for their individual projects. I was the data reporter on pretty much all of the stories in this. So this project was called Over-Policing Parents. It was a collaboration with NBC News about the child welfare system in the United States. And basically what the idea, and going out of order on the bullet points on this, the idea and the frame that we were going about this at the outset was there's been kind of this general awakening and an awareness about racial disparities and issues in the criminal justice system, right? And kind of like a fresh skepticism about various institutions and people within the criminal justice system that has maybe really taken off in the last 15, 20 years, right? But that same awakening has not necessarily happened in child welfare, which is not technically a criminal process, but in many ways functions very similarly. So our idea was, can we kind of break this system down into its component parts and use data to say what is going on at each of those levels? Because often when you see a child welfare story, and I know you've all seen this, you'll see the outlier example. You'll see the one that makes the news about horrific abuse or kids that are in foster care for a really long time or whatever, but it's not actually indicative of what the reality is for a lot of people who get involved in the system. So to do this, we got a huge data set from the National Data Archive on Child Abuse and Neglect. I'm sorry I did not put the name of that on there, but it is a national data set basically where every state reports their child welfare cases up into this huge data set. The thing is, you have to get a research license to use it, and there are this is a very fruitful area, I think, for data journalism going forward. There are a lot of data sets that have traditionally only been used by academics and researchers, but journalists are functionally not really any different from them. So oftentimes you can get access to those types of data sets, but you do have to read the fine print because, for example, the license agreement for the data sets we used said we had to refer to the data sets in a very specific way, credit in a very specific way, whatnot. So just read the fine print on that. And they were very big data sets, so without coding knowledge, it was impossible to analyze them. This was a partnership project. We don't have to get into that. I don't know if you've worked on partnerships. They are great, but sometimes they are challenging. Happy to answer more questions about that later. So the example of kind of small to big within this one, we had the first story in our series was about mandatory reporters, which if you don't know, there's entire classes of professions in a lot of states that are required to report cases of suspected child abuse or neglect, which sounds like a great idea in theory. Like if you see something, say something. Pennsylvania, which had the Jerry Sandusky scandal in the last decade, decided that they never wanted this to happen again, so they were going to expand the number of professions under this mandatory reporter category and make the penalties a lot stiffer. So we wanted to see, does it actually work? Does mandatory reporting work? And this was kind of like a good natural experiment. And lo and behold, I'm going to move ahead through a couple of these things for time's sake, but happy to talk more about them. Lo and behold, we found through our analysis that when you expand mandatory reporting and you really make it so that people have to report suspected cases of child abuse and neglect, what you do get is a lot more reports. What you don't necessarily get is a lot more substantiated reports. So in this case, sexual abuse cases, there were no more substantiated cases in the 5 years after the reform happened than in the 5 years before, even though there was a significant increase in the number of reports. So this is a small to big because we started with that idea, right? Like how did this law change play out in Pennsylvania, and what effect did it have? And so I was able to target the analyses of those data sets in a very specific way. The flip side of that was a story we did about termination of parental rights, which for those of you who don't know, if you're in foster care and you're going to be adopted, you have to have your parental rights terminated before the adoption can go through, basically. And it's the end of the legal relationship between a parent and child. We had an idea that this was like something we wanted to report on, but we didn't really know what. We figured we'd just count where TPRs, as they are acronymized, happen most often and where they happen most quickly, and wherever kind of sticks out to us in the data, that's where we'll go. So that's what we did. And West Virginia was an outlier on both of those metrics. So we ended up doing reporting there. It worked in this case because the frame of our story was like a little bit more explanatory, and the project was like, we're examining the child welfare system, not we are trying to, root out the specific case of injustice or whatever. So it was able to work a little bit better in this case, and it did. The challenge was we didn't have any anecdotes, so we had to kind of build all that from scratch. We knew we wanted to go to West Virginia, and then we had to go and find those cases, which if you've ever reported on child welfare, is a very difficult thing to do because you don't really have access to documents and such. But I thought we got two pretty good stories out of it. Here's kind of the nut graph, at least of the national figures, along with some of the findings from West Virginia. So I'm going to hand it over to Zach.
Great, thanks, Agnew. Our final presenter is Zachary Carnell, a journalism senior at the University of Florida, specializing in enterprise news, full-stack web development, and data engineering. He will discuss his campus crime project, which allows users to explore an interactive map and database of UF crimes, along with any available court records, going back to 2016. Zachary has one class remaining before graduating, and he wants a career in data journalism, so, if you want to see him afterwards. So please welcome Zachary.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone who came today. I'm not used to stage light, so I can't really see any of you, but I'm assuming there's people here. I'm very excited and feel very excited and fortunate to be here today, that I was asked to talk about some of the projects I've been working on. Honestly, when I chose journalism as a major, I never anticipated that I would get to be doing what I'm doing now. Just because kind of growing up, since like 6th grade, I've been doing computer programming, but it was always kind of more of just like a hobby than a career to me. And then throughout high school, I kind of became more of a writer. And so it's been really cool to learn some useful ways to kind of marry my coding skills with my reporting skills at UF. Most recently, that marriage took the form of ufcrime.com, which, as Randy was saying, is an interactive map and database of UF crimes going back to 2016, created by myself and good friend slash fellow student slash future editor of the New York Times, Isabella Douglas. She's great. Before I kind of get into the nuts and bolts of like what it can really do and how it was made, I wanted to first talk about why it was made, because I think it's a really good story and just kind of how journalists can respond to institutions and keeping them accountable and making data more accessible to the public. We started with, the reason we created it really in the first place, even though UF, they have their database of their own with UF crime data going to the past back 60 days or something, 60 days. But the reason we decided to create this is because UF removed the ability to export historical crime data. Specifically, they removed online access to years of historical crime data. And that may seem insignificant. I mean, all they did was remove an export button, but it kind of concerned us for a couple reasons. The first one was, sure, they weren't legally required to have that, and that you could still get that data through records requests, but it begged the question, why take the time to remove that feature, which makes it way more accessible after it was already there. I understand, I think as a lot of us probably do with public records, like institutions not going out of their way to create documents that don't already exist or that aren't required. But in this case, the feature was already there and it made it way more accessible, and then they removed it. And so it made us wonder, like, okay, what's the motivation behind that? And even more broadly, is it indicative of a kind of harmful trend away from transparency? And realize, we're kind of, this is in the context of us, we're realizing this in the context of a newly appointed president who at that time just like was hard to get an interview with him, President Sass. Luckily that's changed this semester, which is awesome. But yeah, this is just stuff we're thinking about, like how can we respond to this? And so one of the main things is, that's one thing, is just the issue of kind of checking that transparency and not letting it escalate. The other reason is that this data, probably the bigger reason, is that this data is really useful for students, faculty, parents to make informed decisions about safety on campus. And so if I'm a parent or a student and I see an article that, fraternity row is a hot spot for sexual assault, and that's even true especially for dorms that live nearby, I'm probably going to at least try not to live there at the very least. If, I'm a guy, but I have 6 sisters, a lot of whom have gone to UF. I'm probably not going to take a casual nighttime stroll through fraternity row on a Friday night if there aren't any, especially when there weren't any emergency blue lights. And this is what's kind of interesting about this story in particular, is you can really directly connect the dots between the crime data and the analysis, and then the kind of positive change it can have when it comes to safety and just helping the public. Because this crime data, this is actually 5 years ago they put this analysis out. Once students kind of caught wind of this and then realized that there weren't any of these emergency blue lights on fraternity row, they started protesting, and then in the articles themselves, when they were talking to newspapers, they were citing this data specifically. They were pointing to this data. And then less than a month later, they got those emergency blue lights installed. And so that's just, even on a small level, just on a campus level, that's the kind of impact this can have. And I That's kind of what we're thinking about when we're creating this, kind of what we're trying to make it more transparent, and then also just make it more accessible, remove one more hurdle for reporters so they can do this kind of reporting. Now, we were actually lucky, even though they had removed the export button, this is a web scraping 101 technique. We luckily, even though they removed the export button, all the data was still being loaded in behind the scenes. They were still sending it from the server to the client, and so we were able to, this is public data, so it's all legal. We were able to just go into developer tools, network, fetch, and all of it was just sitting there for us to take. And so we grabbed that and we fed it into a database. We really were at least last semester when we put this out, it's kind of a soft launch. We're trying to get it out there as soon as we could. But it's, we're really working on ways to incorporate some of the visualizations from the lovely people over at Flourish. That stuff is really inspiring. But the way it kind of works is we scrape the data, bought our own web server. This is completely independent from UF, by the way. We do all this ourselves. Bought a domain. We do currently use like a LAMP stack. That's all you need to know from that is it's like it's MySQL, PHP, kind of outdated. And kind of this semester we're working on updating that to more modern technology like React and but yeah, it's all fully responsive, fully automated, and there's a lot you can do with it. I actually want to show a demo right now. So you might be seeing this and being like, wait, something's broken. Why is there crime showing in Brazil or Greece? But that's actually totally right. Pretty much what happened is there was an international, so there's students abroad, an international fondling case. And that's the kind of stuff that maybe you want to be able to appreciate just in a data sheet, but you can see on a map, like what the heck is going on there? We have a student working on that story right now. Beyond that, you can see we were able to join, there's a lot of basic information like crime type, when it happened, where it happened, and we also joined court records using the report number. And so now you can really easily, if you see something that catches your eye, you can super quickly pop that into the local court records and get that right away, get the arrest report and kind of see what happened. On top of that, we also added the ability you can share like links of it. If you want to be like, hey, this thing happened here, check this out, like on Twitter or whatever. We also, and this is the main part, is we made it to where the data is, you can export the data in multiple formats. And this is the main thing. This is why we're really in a rush to get it out, is because we want to just make sure like you can get this data. And so you can search through it, you can sort it, and it allows, if I want to see like, how much crime is there at Weimer Hall, which is the journalism college, I can look that up and I can export this. And it's all regularly, it's like almost entirely automated, regularly scraping data every hour and feeding that into the map. And yeah, we have this semester we're kind of working on integrating it into our local student newspaper and trying to continue to improve it, add more visualizations and so on. Part of what that will look like is more advanced filtering. More advanced filtering. This is kind of like a prototype I just made, whether it's through keyword, crime type. We want to make some kind of heat map. You'll see something similar in the Flourish presentation. We also, more advanced charts. We really want to make it easier for you to kind of see the impact of how this data can manifest. But aside from UF crime, well, the reason I share that is just because I think these kinds of databases are can be really helpful in not just helping like on campus, like at a very small level, but even if we're talking about like local newspapers, I think this stuff is really important because it can save so much time instead of having to put all these records requests in. I kind of have this like envision this utopia. It's kind of a pipe dream, but just like being like where the only people that have to go to the government for records requests are the people maintaining these online databases, and the people writing the stories don't have to worry about it. And so my passion is just like trying to get as many public records out of the government's hands and just online to where anyone can get it. Something I've been doing over the summer, can I get some water real quick? I'll get my mouth dry, thank you. Something I've been doing over the summer is maintaining what is probably one of the largest databases of public records at UF. Certainly in the College of Journalism, we have voter records, vehicle registration, election data, arrests, bookings, court filings. This is the baby of Brandon Meyer and Ted Brightis. They're awesome. They teach at UF. I love them. And it's just so useful because it saves so much time and it really gives reporters an edge. Specifically, I'm going to pull it up right now. I think the voter records are probably the most popular database that people use because you can get contact information from there. You can see voter history. Probably the most famous Florida resident is Donald Trump. One moment. And from that, he's smart enough not to include his email and phone number, but a lot of times, if you're trying to, we had, there was a story I covered last semester of a UF football player who we didn't know at the time, but died from a gunshot. Ended up finding out later it was a self-inflicted gunshot. But we're calling around trying to talk to family, talk to people his roommates, and we're able to just right away put his name in, put his family name in, and find people who might know what's going on. The other thing, something I noticed too, is that it seems to be okay with voting by mail. Yeah, there's a lot you can get from that. The other thing you can do with this is put in specific addresses. And so, if I just want to, specifically with that, with the UF football player, if I just want to see I'll put in this is my old address. If I just want to see everyone that lives on this street, I can do that. Or even I just put in Cardinal Street. Conference Wi-Fi might be annoying. But I can just see everyone who lives on a street. I can talk to all of them. I can talk to neighbors. I can talk to roommates. And that's how we can get in contact with some of these people. I can't cover all these databases today, but they're just so useful. One of the main ones we use a lot too, you can look up license plates. And that was one of the things we used to talk to one of the family members for that story. The arrest database can be used for, we have student journalists who are looking at this every day in the breaking news class and just looking for any kind of outliers, any interesting stories. And we also have Alachua County criminal cases. This is so useful. You can just look up, again, I don't know if conference Wi-Fi is going to let me, but you can look up specific, something that's really useful is you can look up attorneys, high-profile attorneys who generally work with high-profile clients, and they can be a gateway into some really interesting stories. Something else is we also track local government agencies and schools, and specifically we'll scan them for names that match representatives, students, teachers. If we see a name that's recognizable, we can start working on a story like that. I won't spend too much more time, but I really believe in this stuff. I think, I do worry sometimes about just kind of the direction as local newspapers have kind of struggled to compete. I think this is just one of the ways where we can kind of make it to where they can still compete. Like, I don't want with mainstream newspapers because it just saves so much time, money, gets it out of the hands of the government, just where everyone can get it. And so I really enjoy doing this stuff. This is actually my voter record. So if if you have any questions, you can reach me there. Yeah, I mean, I really, honestly, I love working on these projects. I love what I do. So if it's an interesting enough project, I'd even be willing to help for free. Like, I really just enjoy doing it. So yeah, if you have any interest, I really like it. So thank you so much. Thank you. If you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you so much.
Exactly. So we do have some time for questions. I have the obligatory question, which is, are you guys using AI currently, or do you plan to use AI in any of your data analysis?
I actually think that AI can be really useful, especially in terms of like cleaning data. I don't trust AI as far as I can throw it in terms of like it interpreting things out of data. That is just my opinion, is that like the most public-facing AI that we see is built to sound correct and not be correct. And so I always sort of urge caution there, but it does a whole lot of things and there's a whole lot of potential. So I think the answer to that is going to be yes, just how we use it.
Yeah, I think on the coding front too, there's a lot of potential. I know somebody on our staff uses, I think it's Copilot. I forget what the tool is exactly. He uses it, basically like generates the code for him, and you can kind of query it to do that. So for folks who might have a little bit higher barrier for entry for, thank you, whoever turned that off, who may have a higher barrier for entry for coding, it is a good way in. That being said, you still at some level, like, there's often times where it'll spit out some code that doesn't work, and like if you don't know what you're doing, you might not be able to troubleshoot it very well. So I think for now, it's hard to say exactly how this is going to evolve, but for now, it's definitely not like a kid you can leave at home by itself. You definitely have to really kind of parent it along a bit and guide it.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, definitely. When it comes to AI, definitely Google Pinpoint, if you're not using that. Super, super helpful. You can just throw a bunch of PDFs in there, and you can keyword search them. So definitely use that. It's really useful.
Okay. Thank you. No question here?
Thank you. Is this working? Okay. Anybody can answer this, but Stephen, something you said had kind of sparked this question about collaboration between writers and people on the data side. Do you have any tips about like how that relationship can work very well? Maybe even an anecdote about working with a writer that you could share.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one rule is I am also a journalist. I think that there's sort of antiquated views on what makes a reporter, what makes a journalist within newsrooms. I know that the folks at this conference sort of end up falling on my side of this, but treat me like a partner. I am here to help. I can do reporting. I can do all of these things, and I don't love being brought in late to projects because I can't do good work. And so if you either bring me in when we're starting, and I'm here's the thing. I feel like I've gained a reputation as like a Dr. No. Like, I am the guy that goes out there and is like, this is not possible. So I think some reporters
They're much more easily accessible. And there's a fine line to strike between like basically providing what is essentially like government data or some sort of other data with like some sort of value add like analysis that is also still granular enough so that we can do our own kind of like vetting of the information. So I think it's very context specific. Obviously, the more original the work is that you all are doing, the like more we'd have to rely on that data. If you're the only ones collecting it, if it's not actually public data, and it is, you know, representative or it's comprehensive in some form, that would definitely be an avenue for that. I think typically, because there's never been a ProPublica story that's taken less than 2 months, we usually, if it is like a public data set, even if we start with like a nonprofit's kind of slice of it, we end up going to the raw stuff. But like I'm working on a story right now from the Environmental Working Group where they collect a tap water database, and the value add that they had there is they did all the state level like records requests, and that's 50 different records requests that I don't think we have the time or inclination to do. So like that's an example of where we would use that kind of like data.
The two questions that I would ask if I'm getting into nonprofit data or data that's not collected by the government, although I do ask these of the government as well, is how was the data collected and why was the data collected? Because a lot of nonprofits collect data to make a point, even if that point is not true, so they may leave things out, they may do all of that. So I'm always approached skeptically and just sort of I immerse myself in the methodology of those things because it can tell us. I mean, like, good data can come from anywhere, and so, you know, it's just, you gotta be able to, I like to focus on the methodology.
Yeah, just be prepared for the skepticism, and I think just take it like head on also.
Yeah.
Second, you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, kind of going back to some of the stuff they said earlier about interviewing the data, just like you would, you know, if you're covering some kind of political issue, you're going to interview both sides of that. Same with data you get from nonprofits. You know, if you're going to get data from one nonprofit that's on one side of the issue, get data from another nonprofit that's on the other side of the issue, see how they compare. Like, just make sure you have to be mindful of that stuff when you're sourcing data.
So you alluded to this in your last answer, but I'm really interested in how long each of those projects you presented took, and how do you get newsroom buy-in for something that might not show anything for possibly a few months?
I am not well positioned to answer that question. The second part of that, I will tell you how long it took. We started reporting on this in the summer of 2021, and we published our first story in October of 2022. So more than a year. It wasn't a concerted effort the whole time. I would say we started really reporting and working on it for maybe like 7, 8 months, 6, 7, 8 months, something like that, through the end of the year. So yeah, it was multi-month.
I mean, technically, my project took 2 years, but that was because I filed FOIAs and then just let them sit for a while, which is how I do a lot of projects. I get interested in something and know that the FOIA data is not going to come in quickly, so I sort of let them sit, and then they come back, and so probably 14 months after I filed, it was when I actually started beginning the project in earnest, so it took about 10 months, but I also am not... I don't work on one thing at a time. I work on a jillion things at a time. So it didn't take 10 months of my time full time. In terms of getting buy-in for things, I mean, a lot of what I do is a lot of pre-reporting on this so that we can give, after 2 weeks of reporting, we can give a minimum and maximum story based on what we have. Because I can't, if there's not a good minimum story there, our editors don't want us to spend all the time in the world on this, because we could go down the path of spending several months and end up nowhere. So we sort of make that calculus, and if there's a good minimum story, we'll pursue it. But, I also am the person working on the dumbest long-term things that you can think of. Like, I'm in year 9 of our project on fatal police shootings. I'm in year 8 of a project on opioids. Like, you chunk it away and you make it a big project by doing things slowly and over a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have a lot more experience to speak from, a lot more wisdom there. But specifically with the projects I talked about, the UF Crime website was, I pretty much took it like a class, not actioned on it officially, but I approached it like that because one of the main reasons I wanted to do it was also to just learn get better at back-end development. and really just build something from the ground up, install all the libraries and go through all that. So that probably took like a little under 3 months, in just while juggling other classes and work and stuff like that. But yeah.
Hi. I started one of my investigations with the approach of big to small. So I analyzed like 1,200 cases in Egypt. And we have done a lot of work on that databases. So after that, when it comes to work on the ground, I didn't get much information because victims are afraid to talk to journalists because of the political situation in Egypt. So at that point, when you decide to give up or to move forward in your investigation and give it more time?
I think ultimately, like there could be a story just on the analysis depending on what your bar is. I think the main thing is making sure that your analysis is accurate, right? Like that there's not some component of this that's missing. And a big part of kind of the beauty of the journalistic process when it comes to like data reporting is that you're forced to do that by finding the people in the field that it were actually affected, right? And seeing what that actually means on the ground. I'd say keep plugging away at it. I think I've been lucky and or blessed in my career to work with reporters who are fairly like well-sourced in the communities that we're discussing. So like finding the different levers you can, whether that's local groups that might have connections, in that case, since you have a compelling reason, potentially offering, confidentiality to some extent to at least get your foot in the door and understand what's going on. I think there's ways into that, but I think the main thing you'd want to, at the end of the day, we don't want to put anything out that isn't true, right? So like once you've figure out how to meet that bar, and then if you can, then there might be different versions of the story you can do. If you can't, then it might be a little bit tougher to figure out a path forward.
I have a follow-up question. So if you have like, you read the files and the cases, and you have stories in the files. So you can use those stories instead of real people or not.
What kind of files are these, or cases are these?
It's like at a Supreme Court in Egypt. So it's a kind of when judges use some articles to violate the law to make the sentences shorter.
Yeah, certainly in a lot of investigative work, you can use like primary source type documents like that to quote from. I think usually you'd still want to talk to the people, or at least make an effort to talk to the people behind it, but it's not always possible, obviously. But yeah, you can theoretically, depending on how your story is set up.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that concludes the first part of our workshop. Please join me in thanking the panel this afternoon. So we now turn to the hands-on portion of the workshop with Flourish, the world's leading data visualization and storytelling tool. Flourish is part of the Canva family and features a vast library of templates, empowering users to create interactive charts and unique visualizations that are interactive, easy to embed, and require no coding. Today's presenters from Flourish are Luisa Bieder and Maria Fernanda Cajajon. Sorry, let me try one more time. Cajajon. All right. Linda's a product manager at Flourish, where she drives the development of new visualization templates and features. She works closely with journalists and organizations to create compelling data narratives. Maria is a data visualization specialist at Flourish. Her work focuses on teaching data visualization and best practices to broad audiences through different formats. She has worked in newsrooms in Venezuela, the US, and in Spain. We'll take a quick minute to make the transition, and then we'll start the second part.
Oh, the music's back.
Sorry.
Lord knows that I've tried to. You said I was the only one. No one likes being lied to. You made this mess and left me with the pieces.
Oh, go for it.
Now I wanna burn all the bridges between us. I can't focus, I can't forget. I've been thinking too much lately. I just need to clear my head. I just need to clear my head. I've been stuck on your memory, but it's not like I need it. And we may have some history, but we don't have to repeat it. You made this mess and left me with the pieces. Now I'm gonna burn all the bridges between us. I can't focus, I can't forget. I've been thinking too much lately. I just need to clear my head. I just need to clear my head. I just need to clear my head.
I need to drag this.
I just need to clear my head.
Why is it there?
Oh, and can we switch to the other? Yeah. So it should be yours.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then I need to go make it maximized.
No, that's for center view. So we actually need to drag it backwards. Yeah, there we go. I'll let you know.
Oh my god.
I'll let you know. Up. A little bit higher up. Higher up, there we go. Yeah.
Okay.
And you have presenter notes on yours.
Let me see where I put that. All right.
Pass me that water.
Yeah. There you go. Where are the presenter notes? Which one? Found them. Okay.
And
I'll let you start.
okay. Hello, everybody. If you're wondering why we're not standing up, it's actually because I am very short and that podium eats me up whole. So we're gonna be sitting down here. Sorry?
Pull the mic closer.
Sure. Is this better? Yeah? Okay, amazing. Well, welcome everybody to our session, Beyond Words, Mastering Data Visualization for Impactful Reporting. This is gonna be where we try to make it a continuation as fluid as possible with the first half of the session. So we're gonna be more focused on data viz specifically, and more importantly, why you may want to include it in your reporting if you're working in a newsroom or as a freelancer or independent organization, why are charts important and how they can help you tell your story better. So, yeah, well, hello everybody. Glad to see you here today. And my name is Maria Fernanda Callejon. I'm a data viz specialist at Flourish. Yeah, Randy already introduced us, but both Luisa and I have a background in journalism, so we're not only talking from a product perspective or an industry perspective, but also from experience, like working with charts. I started with infographics and data visualization around 2018, and it was my passion, so I really do believe in like the power of charts and visuals to communicate.
And I'm Luisa. I work as a product manager at Flourish. And yeah, as Mafe mentioned, also have a background in journalism, studied data and digital journalism in my master's, which led me to work at Flourish eventually via a couple of newsrooms. And yeah, super excited to be here and to be talking about the power of data viz and data storytelling today. Before we dive in, a few housekeeping bits. If you already attended our Canva session earlier today, you might have seen this slide already, but basically we would love it if you could keep your questions until the end. We will be around for the rest of the conference. You can find us at the juice stand out there. And we also have a fun quiz that you can do while at the juice stand around which chart type you are, which chart type matches your personality. So come find out, tell us what you are. We'd love to see. So we thought we would start by taking a look at the attendees of this conference visually through the power of Flourish. So we got some data from Hannah around the attendees based on the survey that you all filled out when signing up. And we have over 1,600 people here from over 30 countries like Canada, the UK, which would be us. Obviously, most of you are here from the US, as we can see here. And if we dive into the US in a bit more depth, we can see that it's mostly the East Coast that's represented, but also California.
Yeah, and we have a lot of first-timers, but actually most of you are ONA veterans. You've been here more than once or even 17 times. And amongst of you, you amass over 8,000 years of experience. So there's a lot of knowledge, a wealth of knowledge to be untapped after this session. So do connect, chat, also chat to us. We're super happy to connect after this session. But without further ado, it's time to get started with some facts. And you're all journalists, we're all journalists, so we enjoy this. And I thought it would be a nice way to get us started. So fact number one is that we are visual creatures. And what I mean by this is that the way in which we consume the world is predominantly visual. And 65% of the general population are visual learners. This is based on a study, and that just means that we process information the best by visual stimuli. So images, sometimes text, or different hierarchies with the text, charts as well. And but more specifically, we process information over 60,000 times faster via images over than text. And this is just a setup to the idea that we're living in a visual economy. The way, again, in which we experience the world, the things that we produce are mostly visual. The things that we consume are mostly visual. And this also means that we communicate effectively, predominantly in a visual manner. So we are also not only in a visual economy, but also in a visual culture.
The fact number two that we brought along with us today is that we are surrounded by data, everything from the weather on your apps to the steps that are being counted by your Apple Watch to your social media likes, but also the number of conference attendees or numbers on police officers like we heard about earlier. Data is everywhere. To give you a bit of an idea how much data is everywhere, it is actually 175 zettabytes worth of information by 2025 that we will see, which is a lot. 1 zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes, so it's kind of hard to put that into perspective, but if you tried, you could imagine it would take almost 2 billion years to download it all. So lots of data, obviously not all of it worth a story, but a lot to get stuck into for you as journalists. So massive opportunity for journalism, but it's important to understand how data can be used. We see it twofold, as a source and as the story itself. So you can either use data to back up an existing story, kind of go beyond traditional reporting methods, enrich it, add some more context, or data can also be the story itself, where you would not have been able to find the story if you didn't have access to a large data set, and you can actually only spot those trends by having access to that data.
And as Luisa mentioned, with the abundance of data that there is in those two approaches, there's also some questions to ask when you're working with data. And at this point, and with the first half of the session, I assume that you are all going to start working with data if you're not already doing that. We've split it into 4 main questions. So first question that you should ask yourselves is, how can you use this data? Right? It's like, how can this data actually serve you? How can you put it into context, meaning information for that matter, not just data, but like any information without context really is not that worth it. You really need to make sure that you make it understandable for others and to actually focus on it from a specific angle, make sure that it makes sense for other people. Then how you can make it actionable, meaning how can you actually make sure that that data that you're putting out into the world or data you're working with ends up having some value, some return for you to make it useful in any way. And then how can you make it engaging? We can be talking hours and hours about charts, data, journalism, but if we don't make it appealing to other people, to the general population, if we don't make sure that the data we're presenting is actually interesting for others, we're really failing at communicating with others, and that's really what we're here to do. So there are many ways to answer these 4 questions, but the angle that we're going to focus on today is data visualization and data storytelling. So giving meaning to data through data visualization. And what data visualization is, this is like the textbook definition, it's just the graphical representation of information and data. The visuals help us identify patterns, outliers, and show it to others. They're both communication and exploration tools. And I'm going to explain this further down, but keep that idea in mind. Now, data viz is also a tool because it allows you to achieve a specific result. It is a skill because it can be taught, it can be learned. You have to practice it. It can get rusty if you don't do it. You can forget it sometimes. You can pick it back up. But you can build upon it, and you can actually learn it. It's a language because even though if you don't work with charts right now, or if you see a chart and you're very confused by it, they're not arbitrary. The rules that govern charts and the basis of data visualization are actually quite stiff in a way. So once you learn them, you're able to produce charts over and over again, and it's just like a language, like the grammar. And my favorite one is that data viz is also a superpower because it allows you to visualize your data or see your data from a different perspective, to understand issues differently. And I think it was Stephen that mentioned this in his part of the session, but not a lot of people are doing visualization, right? So it's actually something that can differentiate you as a reporter, as a journalist, that can be the X factor that separates you from other people in your field. If you're still not convinced, we also have more information around why you may want to use charts in your reporting.
One of those reasons is high data density. So a single chart can encapsulate vast amounts of information. You've probably heard the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, in the world of data viz, it's probably more like 1,000,000. Quick question or quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar with Hans Rosling? Because I want to show him as an example. 1, 2, 3. Okay, a couple, or more than a couple, but we are, and we're big fans, and we encourage you to check him out. But he's basically, a doctor and professor from Sweden who's really passionate about data and the use of data and data viz to talk about development issues and economic progress. And he popularized an animated scatter plot super similar to this one. We just recreated it using Flourish. And what this chart shows is countries' GDP plotted against their life expectancy over a number of years, and the countries are shaded by region and they are sized by population. And what this chart tells us is that when countries' economies improved, so did their life expectancy, and we can see this beautiful trend of all the countries in the world heading towards the top right corner. And what's so brilliant about this chart, and why I think it's a great example of that first point of high data density, is when you think about how much data is going into this one visualization that we are looking at in these 30 seconds that it's playing, it's quite insane. It's like life expectancy over loads of years, it's GDP, it's population, it's regional. It's so much information that thinking of trying to distill that into an article would be quite difficult, or giving people a spreadsheet of this information would be quite difficult to grasp the story as well.
Second reason why you may want to use charts in your reporting is because they actually drive engagement up. So some of you will be very excited to actually have a figure around the topic, but according to the book, The Infographic, A History of Data Graphics in News and Communications by Dick Murray, a great read, news stories that use infographics have 30 times more page views than stories that don't. And this book was published in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, and I believe the research that he's citing here is actually a bit earlier than that. So after 2020, we got COVID, we got a surge of charts on the front pages. We all were dealing with, flattening the curve or ascending curves and logarithmic scales. So we were all much more exposed to charts than ever before. So one can only think that this figure is much more higher now than it was back then. And in a world with shorting attention spans, I believe we have a short attention span like a goldfish. It's really important to know how to not only catch people's attention but retain it. So good to know that charts are really like strong mechanism to achieve this.
Third reason to incorporate charts or data visualization in your reporting is that they appeal to our visual nature. As we already touched on, images and graphics are often quicker to be understood, and they can both inform and captivate your audiences. So again, a quick example, here's a data set. We can maybe discern some trends, or not really quite trends. We can compare individual numbers between countries, between years. We can't do too much at once. We can't see any bigger picture trends. If we take this and put it into a visualization, we can see how this kind of speaks to that visual wiring of our brain. We can see an actual story taking place. We can use color and shape and legends and text to inform that story and to guide our audience and help them take away the key message of our chart, which in this case is that 5 countries received almost half of the world's asylum requests in 2022. Something that would have been really difficult to see if we just had this at a first glance, at least.
And the fourth reason why you may want to use charts in your reporting, include them in your practice, is that charts have authority. Now, this is going to be probably the most technical bit of the whole talk, so bear with us for a sec. But in 2017, Ihan and Reifler conducted a study in which they were trying to understand whether people could change their beliefs once they were based on misperceptions. So I'm not talking about subjective beliefs, but rather when somebody actively believed something that was factually mistaken, right? For instance, that climate change is false. Now, throughout their studies, they research how different mechanisms to deliver corrected information, so that is, somebody believes something that's false, you try to convince them of the reality by delivering the factual information, and they tested text and charts, and they found out that delivering corrective information in graphical form successfully decreases reported misperceptions, and that a graph reduces misperceptions more than equivalent text. So in plain English, that charts are actually more effective than text in changing people's minds, but also in correcting misinformation effectively, which is something incredibly important to take into consideration going into an electoral year, but also living in an age of misinformation and fake news and all the deep fakes that we're all experiencing. So understanding how you can actually change people's minds for the better, it's a really powerful mechanism. And this is one of the charts that they included in their study. And I'm going to break this down very quickly, but I think it's a really, really powerful example, so bear with for a sec. On their third study, they again delivered the statement, global temperatures have decreased or stayed the same over time. They tested this with self-identified Republicans here in the US. And in the chart to the left, you have the group that identified as not strong GOP, so maybe more in the light side of Republicans. And then to the right, more strongly identified Republicans. The control group is the people that didn't get corrected information, so they only got the statement, and the higher the bar, it means the higher the proportion of participants that believed the statement or agreed with the statement. And you can see how those bars, and I can just quickly use my cursor, you can see how these bars are just higher over here. Now, the second group is the people that actually got information corrected by a text, so information and data that actually showcase that temperatures have been increasing over time. We all know that climate change hopefully is not something to be contested, but to be understood at this point. And you can see how those bars are actually shorter than the previous ones, which means that there was some sort of correction in the beliefs, but not that much. And the third group is actually the people that got the corrected information in chart form. And those are the shortest bars of all the groups, meaning that this is the people that actually changed their minds or disagreed with the statement the most. So again, this is just the synthesis and that idea that charts are really powerful mechanisms to influence people, to change people's minds, and to deliver facts to the general population. Now, up until now, we've only discussed why charts are great and, all the jazz. But now it's a question of how can they actually help you as journalists tell your story. And in a nutshell, data visualization allows you to transform your data, really complex spreadsheets, into insightful visualizations like this one on the screen. They just allow you to really distill all that information into a mechanism that is very engaging for general audiences. More so than that, charts allow you to explore your data because you're able to simply plot it and understand what it's actually telling you, right? Like, what are those numbers telling you effectively. Then to discover patterns that you may not be able to see from the get-go, as Luisa mentioned. And lastly, to communicate. Charts are really effective ways to showcase vast amounts of data to people. But communication is not always the end goal, meaning that you're not always going to showcase your charts to others. And much like in other areas of journalism, you will have to kill your darlings in data visualization too. You're going to work with a bunch of charts, you're going to create a bunch of charts, hopefully, and you're going to have to discard lots of them in favor of the one that actually conveys the most important insight. And I think you could see it with the first half of the session that there weren't really that many visualizations, but the ones that were used were the most compelling ones that were delivering the main message. And when you start working with charts in the newsroom, hopefully this is what it's going to look like roughly. You're going to find some data that you find interesting, you're going to want to analyze it to understand it better, and then visualization is going to come in as any other tool in your toolbox, right? It's just another mechanism to do your reporting, to understand it. You interview your data, and maybe you plot it into a chart to understand it better, see trends over time. And in that process of visualizing, you may find a different angle, you may find one of those hidden patterns, something you were not able to see before that interests you, and maybe you pursue that angle further, or maybe you discard that angle. That really depends on you, your story, and what you're doing. But in the end, it's just rinse and repeat. Like, this cycle can go on and on and on until you stop it. And the point is that in the end, you just have to learn how to follow all the steps, create your charts, and learn when it's a good time to just showcase them to the world. Now, hopefully, the question about whether you should use charts in the newsroom is no longer an if, but a when. So you're asking yourselves, when can you get started?
And we hope that the answer is now. You want to get started now, straight away. And before you get started, though, let's take a quick walk down memory lane, back to the days where design and also data viz was complicated and hard. Tools did not really speak to one another. You used one for photo editing, one for image processing, one for vector design, etc. Data visualization was no different. It had high entry barriers, and you had to be a bit of a coding wizard to create anything worth showing or understanding. Thankfully, those days are behind us because we bring to you, if it loads, Canva and Flourish, who have lowered the entry barriers to empower anyone to get started with data viz and data storytelling, and in just a few clicks. So making it super easy for anyone to create visualizations with their data. Getting started with Flourish is super easy. You can select one of our templates from our template chooser. We have hundreds of different starting points across about 30 different visualization templates. You can upload your data and customize the look and feel of your chart, and then you can publish it and embed it on your website or in your CMS or in a Canva design. Our mission is to democratize design and data storytelling, and through that, we have risen to become the world's leading data storytelling platform, empowering 1.5 million users that have created more than 15 million visualizations that have amassed over 32 billion views, which is largely thanks to organizations like yours, newsrooms, that have large viewerships coming and engaging and looking at those visualizations. Flourish is designed to be incredibly versatile so that we have something for everyone, from a complete novice to a more advanced user. And I wanted to kind of demonstrate this on an example with a newsroom that we work with at Flourish. The example is Tortoise. They're a UK-based news organization. They focus on slow news, so kind of information behind the main headlines. And they became a Flourish customer a couple years ago, and I really like the way that they use Flourish because they use it for very basic day-to-day things, for some a bit more advanced, and then for some super advanced things. And that's really just showcasing how kind of broad our offering is as a tool. So on the kind of no-code end of the spectrum, we have their usage where they create daily charts for their homepage. On most days, you'll be able to find one. Here's an example where they used our area chart template to visualize the number of refugees fleeing Sudan. This chart could literally be created in 5 minutes or less, They click on a starting point, upload their data. Because they're on a business plan, it already comes in their colors, fonts, etc. They hit publish, they're done. This is something that their team can do quite easily and quickly. Then on the a bit more involved part of the spectrum, we have this low-code example where they created this in-depth scrollytelling piece where they are visualizing the results of their global AI index, which they collect data on themselves, and they're explaining the results of that through this really engaging piece where as you scroll through, you kind of get parts of the charts explained to you and you can contextualize them, and it's like someone's kind of telling you what to look at and how to understand it. And scrollytelling is also something that we offer as a tool, but it can be a bit more involved, and this whole piece is, a bit more of a production. And then on the most advanced end of the spectrum, we have projects like the Westminster Accounts, which is where Tortoise teamed up with Sky News to collate, analyze, and put together data from various sources to kind of try and answer the question, where is the money coming from in British politics? That was splintered across loads of different data sources, so they had a huge amount of work on the data side. And then when it came to visualizing it, they really wanted to have a visualization type that was specific to this story. So they designed and coded that, plugged it into a Flourish template, which allowed them to repurpose it. So we also have a software development kit that if you do have developers, they can actually build specific templates for your newsroom. To sum that up, here's a nice quote from Katie, who's Tortoise's data editor. Flourish is an integral part of how we present our journalism to the world. Everything we do, from simple everyday charts to interactive maps to completely custom visual storytelling pieces, would be a lot harder without it. And Tortoise is just one of many, many newsrooms around the world using Flourish. Here are a couple more logos, and I would love to hear from some of you if you've had any experience with Flourish. So I hope maybe we can continue that conversation at the juice bar.
Okay, Colin, can we, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, it is time to go into the more hands-on part of the session. And I mean, you may have heard the saying, show don't tell. So let's actually bring some data to life right now. Now, this is a quick recap. Zachary very kindly lent us his data from the UF Crime Project. And he just sent me the Excel file with like the raw data, and we're gonna visualize it live on the stage right now. So as a very, very quick recap, this is crimes reported at the University of Florida campus between 2016 and 2023. There's some partial data right there, but nothing to worry about too much right now. And some of the variables that we're gonna visualize or see in our data are the type of crime, the location of the crime, and the date. So again, because the goal of this, and you can tell I was actually looking for the Google Pinpoint tab on his session, so I'll take a look at that later. But the goal of this part of the session is not so much to go in depth in the analysis. That is something that you as reporters will have to do, and that is not what we're here to show you, but rather how you can bring that data to life using Flourish. So first things first, welcome to Flourish. If you've never checked it out, it's the name of our tool, the data visualization tool from Canva, and you can access it by going to flourish.studio online. And I'm simply gonna go and sign in. I already signed into my account, or should I? Well done. And this is gonna be your projects page. So this is where all your charts are gonna live when you start visualizing. If you are just new and are creating an account, this is probably gonna be empty. In my case, I obviously have a bunch of folders and a bunch of projects right here. I'm just gonna go to my UFL folder right here for this particular demo, and I'm gonna hit new visualization. A bit of a spoiler there with the charts. But now that takes us to the template chooser. So template chooser is the beating heart of Flourish, because this is where all of our starting points exist. This is all the possible chart types that you can create with our tool, and really it's just as simple as clicking on one of the starting points and plug it in your data. So I'm just gonna like quickly show you all the possibilities that we have over here. We have everything from electoral charts, sports templates, pictograms, different options for maps, racing line charts, racing bar charts, and so on and so forth. just for a second back to my deck, we ask ourselves questions in order to understand or to know, just quickly hide this, yeah. There we go. Questions to be able to know what we wanted to visualize. So the question number 1 was, what is the most common crime type on campus? And this is what we call a magnitude question, because basically what we want to know is, on the data set, how many crimes were there on type A, type B, type C, and then which one was the predominant one. So after running some analysis, we just got a quick list of the top crimes right here. So whenever you're going to Flourish, I can just take a look at this. And of course, once you're working, as I said, like data visualization is a skill, it's a muscle, you work it, and this process is going to be super quick in the future. But once I looked at my data and I know my question is a what question, it's a magnitude question, I know that I want to visualize this in a bar chart format. So back into Flourish, I just go in and I select the starting point that I want. In my case, is a bar chart. And you're first presented, if the Wi-Fi allows, there we go, with a visualization that has preloaded data. And we always do this so that anybody creating a chart from scratch is able to see what the final product roughly looks like. Obviously, with your data and with my data right now, it's going to look a bit different, but this should give you like a good guideline of what you're going to end up with. So very quickly, I'm just going to go to my data tab, and this is where the data is being pulled from. And I can either upload a CSV, an Excel file, anything by clicking on this button, or I can just copy and paste it from my Google Sheet, and that is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to grab all of this, Command-C, and just paste it right here. Clear it and paste. And that's it. And here in my little preview window, in a second, again, Wi-Fi, it's struggling a little bit. There we go. That already changed from what I used to have to what my data is now reflected. And here we have our data bindings. This is simply how the data is communicating to the different settings of the tool, and it's speaking to how it's going to interpret each of the columns and rows of my data set and how it's going to plot them into the chart. So if I go to my preview, I already have a bar chart that's sorted from greatest to, well, smallest in this case, and we can see how larceny is the most prominent crime type on campus. Now, this is a very rough graph, but with few styling decisions that I'm going to apply right now, we can make that a bit better. I'm going to hide this legend because we don't need it. I'm going to quickly make some tweaks to the axes. And again, because I've run this demo like 1,000 times in my brain, I already know what I want. This might take you a bit longer the first time you're charting with it, but it's just to show how quickly this process really is. And now this is looking okay, but if you were on a newsroom organization, if you were with Flourish, you would be able to apply just your personal theme. It actually would be applied automatically to your charts. Oops, sorry. But for this one, I just created a specific theme for this particular chart. We can see how that's pulling my colors, my font, and my logo. And I can just do a little bit more of styling. I can do some very, very quick editing here just to bring this chart even further. And this is all going to make sense in a second. I add that. I make a couple of edits. And now we have a much more clear story, right? I'm highlighting the main bar, which is the topic of the story I'm trying to tell. I have everything else grayed out, so it's not so overpowering. I can add labels to my data points, so it's a bit more legible, easier on the eyes for my readers. And lastly, I can add a quick header that shows and says larceny, most common crime type on campus. And again, I can turn some of our nice features that highlight legend elements, sorry, not labels, but legend. Yeah, legend elements to match the same color on my data set. Now, I did this very quickly. I appreciate that a lot of you are not going to be able to get the same result in as little time, but in interest of time, I had to. But this is just to show just how quickly and how easy you can actually do this in your own time for your own projects. The last thing I need to do is simply add a name to this. I'm just going to call it demo. And I just hit export and publish, and I'm ready to go. Once I hit publish, I either can share when it loads. There we go. The public URL, which is the same look and feel of my chart, and this is a link that you can share with anybody you're interested in showing your chart to. But I also have my embed code, and this is what you want to put in your CMS, in your website, wherever you want. Now, even better is the fact that Flourish is seamlessly embedded in Canva, and once you're in your Canva presentation or even your Canva website, all you have to do is go to the apps, you type Flourish, you select the Flourish app, and this is automatically going to be connected to your account. And once it loads, you're gonna see all your projects right here. And here I can see my demo. So I click on the demo, and that is now embedded, there we go, into Canva, and it keeps all the interactivity. Again, fully flexible. I can resize it to match the size of my screen, all my dimensions, and if I double click on it, I have all the interactivity that I had on Flourish right on a Canva presentation. Super easy. And we're moving on to question number 2.
Nice. Thank you, Mafe. That was fantastic. So as a next question, we asked ourselves, are there any trends over time visible in this crime data? So we decided to visualize it as a line chart or an area chart, because that's a classic chart type choice for time series data, because it allows us to kind of see the shape. Has something been going up or down? We decided to focus on larcenies again, because in our previous chart, those were the highest reported crime type. And different to the chart that we saw before, which was larcenies are the most reported crime type, we can actually see now in this chart a different angle, a slightly different story, which says larcenies may be the most reported crime type, but actually they're going down. So this is just to demonstrate how, depending on the chart type choice, you might be telling a completely different story. So it always depends what is your story, to choose your chart type based on that. And we'll be sharing some resources on how to make those decisions at the end of the session. But to break this down even more, we decided to animate in some other crime types, some other categories, just to see how those compare to larceny, so that we can contextualize that a bit and have a bit of an understanding. How does something like fraud compare? And how has that been going up or down? It's a bit hard to see these other lines, though, because they are all quite small in magnitude compared to larceny. So on this next view, we're actually looking at a percentage, a stacked percentage area chart, which lets us see the kind of makeup of the crime types as part of a whole. So again, depending on the story that you're trying to tell, you might choose a slightly different chart type. In this one, we can see the percentage of larcenies has also been going down, and other crimes are actually taking up more of the current crime happening compared to last year, for example. Another story you might want to tell is on each crime type individually. We could break this out into a grid of charts. We adjusted the y-axis here to be unique to each of the series, so that we can actually see the trend in the individual categories. So larceny is going down, narcotics violations are actually going up, something that was difficult to see in this view because of the way that narcotics violation is just quite small. And then we might decide to highlight those that are going up and slightly fade out those that are going down. So as you can see, 5 completely different charts with exactly the same data, kind of 5 different angles, 5 different stories, completely depends on what you want to tell. And the way that we combined these, by the way, is with a Flourish story. We offer this feature so that you can kind of stitch together different views of a visualization or different visualizations all together and walk through them step by step, or also turn them into one of those scrolly telling pieces that we saw. So that was question number 2. We have one more question, I believe, to
Yes, we do.
walk through.
Thanks, Luisa. And lastly, as I mentioned, we also had the location of the crime, so we had coordinates to exactly pinpoint where a crime had been reported. And with that in mind, we asked ourselves, where do most crimes happen? And again, emphasis on the fact that we didn't analyze the data, we just were exploring it and trying to see it visualized. So in this case, maps were a very useful tool for us to understand what was happening. And at Flourish, we do have a really wide array of map options. And in this case, we built a heat map to understand how had crimes where had crimes actually happened over time in different areas of campus, and we're able to zoom in and just interact with it and see some of the trends that were mentioned. For instance, I believe this is like Fraternity Road, and you can see how it becomes sort of a hotspot, but also how other areas are also kind of like hot zones on campus, at least according to data set. And one of the things that I noticed was that the area surrounding Shands Teaching Hospital were constantly like on fire in terms of reports. So again, if I were a journalist and I got this data set and I didn't know much of it, but I built this map really quickly just to like see underlying trends, I'd be interested in understanding what's happening around here, right? Like what's going on in the surrounding areas of the hospital? Why is it constantly getting reports? Like maybe there's not a story there, but just like being able to see it plotted in this way gives you some perspective and makes you ask different questions perhaps than if you were only looking at the data. Other different type of map that we built here, we added some annotations to pinpoint different locations that might be relevant, but here we just plotted the different locations of reported crimes on the top 6 most popular crime types on the data set. And with this interactive legend, you're able to select one at a time and understand them a bit further. Once again, we chose larcenies because they were the most popular crime type, so just to keep the trend ongoing, but you're able to see hotspot like again, the neighborhood where sororities are, or Fraternity Road, also some residence halls and private, I think, student private accommodations. And then one interesting insight that we found with the liquor and law violation crime type was that they were the single crime type that saw quite a hotspot of cases at the edge of campus, which is where restaurants and bars are. Again, this is not a surprising insight. I'm not saying that we've discovered anything, shocking. Like, you're seeing reports on where pubs and bars are around campus, but it is the power to see it plotted on a map, right? It's like going from assumption or just belief into actual factual confirmation by the visualization. And on top of that, not only is this map fully customizable and fully interactive, each of the dots has the information that was on the data set. So if that data set had more data around like perhaps the person involved in the crime or so on and so forth, this would all be in this interactive pop-ups, which are fully customizable within Flourish.
And that is hopefully enough to inspire you to get started with Flourish or with your data viz tool of choice. It doesn't have to be Flourish, but we hope that we sparked that interest and that you will start visualizing your data in your newsroom. And yeah, come find us at the juice stand. I think the next slide is a picture of us where I removed the background using Canva because they have a great background remover feature. And we'd love to hear more about your use cases and help you use Flourish and Canva.
But as promised, we do have some time for questions, so feel free to head to the microphones and yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Hi, my name is Ken. I work for RFA, the Vietnamese service of RFA. I've been using Flourish for around 6 months now. And so one thing that popped up during like my time working on my previous project was I used the map function of Flourish. And so I had to make a custom map using like GeoJSON. Mm-hmm. So that was like another big learning curve. Mm-hmm. And I felt like at the time, if I had like a preset or at least access to other people's work before me who used or like who made the exact same type of map that I was working with, it would have really helped. So is there any plan in the future for Flourish to create like a community hub for people to put their previous work into, mm-hmm. or who are willing to share their mm-hmm. previous work?
Yeah, you are picking up on a big pain point for many of our users, which is our maps, and that you often have to upload your own GeoJSON. We are working on making that a lot more intuitive and basically just giving hundreds of maps as starting points. Mm-hmm. At the minute, there's just about 20. That should be coming very soon. That's like currently being worked on, that we have the option to add more starting points to maps. In the meantime, we do have a site where we upload all the GeoJSON resources that we've used or that we know our users have used.
Oh, awesome.
And we've cleaned them up.
What site is that?
I think it's flourish.studio/datasets.
Okay.
Gotcha.
If that's not it, come find us at the juice stand and we will help you find it.
We
And
do have
let us know
resources.
if they're missing as well.
Yeah, we do
Awesome.
have resources in the slide deck, and we're going to share that with you. And that's
Yeah.
one of the resources that's there. But
And another minor point is, correct me if I'm wrong, but currently, do we have the ability to embed the link of the source into like the source text? Like for example, if I put source New York Times, do we have the ability to embed that link yet?
Yeah? You mean like make it clickable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
In the footer settings, you
All right.
can have a source and a URL, and then it uses the text and makes it a clickable link.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kind of a similar question. I Googled Hans Rosling, and I saw that, you can see their posts that pop up that say, how to make a data viz like Hans Rosling.
Yeah.
Do you have similar kinds of recipes on your site? And if so, where do you find them?
yes, we do. I mean, you're all like getting ahead of the resources we're going to share, but yes, we do. So we share inspirational content, so meaning teaching people how to recreate charts or create certain specific goal, reach a specific goal with a chart in our blog. We also have our help docs, and on our blog we do have a master series, we call it master series, where we recreate really famous charts, and I believe Hans Rosling is either there, should be there.
More than
Will
a
be
blog
there.
post, we actually have a starting point in our
Starting point in
template
the
chooser
templates.
where it's like Hans Rosling's famous scatter plot that you can just click and then it duplicates it into your profile. Then you can take it from there. But we definitely need a master series on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have loads of links and really helpful resources that you can get started with that we'll be sharing as well in the slides.
I mean, I might as well just go over them very quickly. Well, really quickly, again, if you really do have questions and we run out of time here, come to the Creative Juices bar and reach out to us. We're super happy to chat about anything, charts, database, charts in Canva, charts in Flourish. And in terms of resources, I'm just going to go very quickly over this, but we're still taking questions if you have any. On Flourish specific, we've added the most helpful links for you to get started. The Flourish Help Center, where all of our hundreds of help desks live. This is if you want to achieve a specific result, troubleshoot over a chart. Our webinars, we host them monthly. We're currently on a summer break, but we'll be back in September. These are 1-hour sessions going over different topics, hot tips on data visualization, topical sessions around how to cover certain areas in journalism and other areas like business reports and so on and so forth. Our Flourish blog, where we publish pieces, and again, we recreate charts or we write about interesting topics. We did one about heat waves and climate change just recently. Football as well with the Premier League, so you can really find anything and everything there. Our training series, which is completely free. You can get started with Flourish and learn the basics of our most basic templates through there. Our SDK, which is our Advanced Software Developer Kit, if you are interested in developing your own templates. Moreover, we do have other tools and resources that are external to Flourish, but that we swear by, like the Financial Times Visual Vocabulary, a wonderful resource if you're starting in data visualization and want to learn more, highly recommend, and other things for, you can source the JSONs, colors for maps, etc. And I mean, lastly, we did include this in case any of you were super curious about data visualization and wanted to take a deep dive. Some of our book recs, just to get started. We try to make it as beginner friendly as possible, meaning we added some different levels. But yeah, these are some of our recs that we actually have in the library and on our London office, so it's always nice. And again, prompting you guys to go and figure out which chart type matches your personality with our fun little quiz.
We're both scatter plots.
Apparently, yeah.
We want to be a map, but we're not.
So if you are a map, do let us know. But yeah, I mean, if you're interested and just have 2 minutes to spare, you can scan the QR code, complete the quiz, and let us know which chart type you are. But lastly, I'm going to leave the slide here for a sec. I can see a bunch of people scanning the QR code now.
If you can't scan it now, you can scan it at the juice stand.
You can see a common trend going on here. Yeah, but no, lastly, just thank you so much for your time, for your attention, for being with us here today. We really enjoyed ourselves, and yeah, we hope you enjoyed yourselves too.
Great. Yeah, nice one.